Good morning, and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners Agenda Setting Work Session for April 29, 2019. I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board, and to my right is
Commissioner Tymancer.
Let's start over here then.
Robin Campbell, Assistant County Manager.
Ramiro Chavez, County Manager.
Elizabeth Petrich, Prosecutor's Office.
Vicki?
Vicki Larkin, Commissioner Edwards' Office.
We can't hear you. Go ahead.
Lavany Bolmar, Clerk of the
Is
Board.
he coming?
And?
Robin Courts, Executive Assistant.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go over the Board of County Commissioners draft agenda for tomorrow, April 30th. And it is tomorrow evening at 5:30 p.m. in Rochester. It is not here at the courthouse, and it's not at 2 in the afternoon. So it's tomorrow evening, April 30th in Rochester. And we will start with Commissioner Edwards, the Vice Chair, doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And then we'll work with an agenda and approval of minutes. And then we get right into presentations. And the first one is Bicycle Commuter Month Proclamation.
Sorry, I was just going through and
It's all right.
this appointment was on the master calendar, and apparently was not in Commissioner Edwards' calendar, so he may not be attending.
Today?
Apparently, and we have a couple of items that really needs a full board discussion today. But we need to review the agenda for tomorrow, because we need to have a 24-hour advance notice as to when we need to publish the agenda. Because it's a special meeting tomorrow afternoon. So,
Correct.
and that's the reason why I scheduled this meeting this morning. We can go through the items and see where it goes, where you'd like to go, Commissioner.
So Commissioner Edwards will not be here, or is he going to be delayed?
That's what my understanding is.
So is there a call being made to see if he can make it?
I think Vicki is calling him
Okay.
to see if at least he can join us for via telephone. That would be good.
Okay, thank you. So the first item is the proclamation for Bicycle Commuter Month.
Yes, Commissioner, tomorrow you will be proclaiming May, the Bicycle Month, and you will have Mr. Duncan Green from Intercity Transit, as well as our own Chris Hawkins will be present to accept the proclamation, and they will be in the position to provide some feedback related to this particular proclamation. As you know, Chris Hawkins, he lives and breathes bicycling commuting, and I don't know if he actually will be commuting to Rochester tomorrow, but he's here, can answer that.
Looks like good weather, so I'm not.
There you go. So
Can't
you
rule
heard
it out.
that.
Okay. Any questions on that proclamation?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Next one is National Military Appreciation Month.
Yep. Hold on. Can he
Yes,
join us
Vicki?
via phone?
Okay.
Tomorrow is the National Military Appreciation Month, where you will have Mr. Louis Zapier is from the American Legion. Mr. Ronald Gratham also will be present, and veterans from county employment is Mark Moffett and Jose Vargas will also be present to accept
Very
this
nice.
proclamation, commissioners.
Very nice. Anything? Emergency Services snow response, or snowstorm sheriff's response from volunteers.
Yes, Kurt Harding, our Emergency Services Director, will be coming with a large group of volunteers, where you will have the opportunity to say thank you for the response they did on on the snowstorm between February 8th and February 14th. As a matter of background, during that time, the volunteers of the Jeep Patrol and South Puget Sound Mobile Research and Rescue provided transportation to medical staff and patients for 2 dialysis centers in Thurston County. On February 12th, a special election was also occurring, which they helped to close the ballots, pick up the ballot boxes, which is required by law. Search and rescue volunteers were able to transport election staff to pick up their ballot boxes. Also, all of them, they're donated their time. The number of transportation requests were a number 32. The number of volunteer hours to provide transport were 102 hours, and the total mileage between that event was 780 miles they cover. All that in volunteer basis. And again, Kurt Harding will introduce those individuals in front of you, and they will give you the opportunity to say, thank you.
So it's an appreciation type presentation, but do we have certificates to give them?
I
Are we doing
believe
any kind of presentation for them?
No, I
do
don't
them?
think, because it's close to over 12 individuals. That would have been a long reading of,
Okay.
but I think it's, yeah.
Anything?
Good.
All right, now we're moving on to number, let me turn the page. Next is Public Works, Albany Street Pond Project presentation.
Yes, last week, when you were reviewing one agenda item that it was decided to take it out, it was related to the release of an easement associated with the Albany stormwater project. And the result of that conversation was your request for Public Works to give a brief presentation on the Albany Street stormwater project. Mark Mauer will be given the presentation, and I think it will be a good opportunity for the local citizens to hear in more detail about this particular project. Also, you decided to table the release of that easement until further notice. And after you hear the presentation, if there is additional comments or questions that you may have, I can organize a more detailed briefing for you. And at some point, we'll bring this item again for your attention to release that private easement.
All right, anything?
No.
All right. Then we move to item number 1 on the agenda, opportunity for the public to address the board.
Certainly, you will have, I would assume, but considering this on an outside location, I don't know how many members of the public will come. But certainly, you have some issues that you might be considering.
Okay.
One is the Courthouse Project, and whether you would like to set a date or put this in front of the voters as a ballot measure. You also have items that you will be discussing tomorrow morning related to the comp plan amendment docket. And there has been a lot of public feedback the county has received related to a citizens initiative named as North Point. So, you may receive some public testimony related to that as well.
That's probably a safe bet.
Yep.
Anything further on that? No.
No.
Number 2, the county manager's update or any follow-up on citizen issues?
We'll follow up on some of the public testimony you received last week. One will be you had a representative from the LP Brown Elementary School. So I will follow up with public testimony related to some of the steps that we have taken in addressing this non-compliance. It's really a code compliance issue. I think she understands that, but also I understand the frustration as to how much time the code compliance process really takes. So I will follow up on those terms.
Okay. Number 3 is consent items A and B. The first one is central services and reclassification.
Yeah, for your consideration, commissioners, this is a request from the newly created IT department to reclassify a current GIS Specialist 2 to a GIS Specialist 1. This particular action will result in reducing the salary from $7,256 to $6,085. That will be a reduction of $1,171 a month, with just about 16% decrease.
Okay. Anything?
We talked about it last week.
Yeah. Typically when we do a pay in class for reclass, isn't that done countywide for positions, a pay and class study?
Well, we are in the process, and I mentioned briefly to you, they have been working and developing a procedure called position control. There addresses many of those. So that has been already released to the offices and departments, and we will start practicing, exercising some of the outline in that document. So there's a little bit behind that. So this request came before that was released. So under normal circumstances, you're right, we do have a county-wide project that will be looking at all the classifications in the county on a systematic approach.
Okay.
And that is coming up.
So is it unusual then to have a specific, any department within the county request a pay and class study just for that department?
If it's
Outside of that
you see,
cycle.
if it's on an individual basis like this, is what I call is based on the business needs of the department. I think this particular request actually makes the case for the business needs, but it will be unusual for an entire department or an entire office to request an assessment of all the classifications within the offices and department at any given point. That is not unusual. That is unusual.
That is unusual.
That is
Okay.
unusual.
Thank you. All right, then next is the auditors, the voucher list, financial services.
Yeah, that's your weekly update. Approval, I'm sorry.
All right.
Could I go back to LP Brown for a minute?
Yeah.
The last I heard on that, there was an idea, I can't remember where it originated from, about the school district could exert eminent domain, or there was some sort of creative idea of the school district being involved in a more aggressive action. Is that still possible, or where are we with that?
So I think it falls back to the legislative authority. And what I know of this particular property, the issue is the property owner is current on his property taxes. So there's really is not a violation, or it's not a default on their taxes. The commissioners can take an action to do anything with the property, whether it's a surplus and everything else, or foreclosure. But and that probably what it makes it a little more difficult, because what we're dealing right now is code compliance. It's really is out of compliance based on the codes that we have in the county, and we do have a process to go through that. So at some point, you are correct. At some point, if all the actions that we take to correct any particular violations related to the code, the board may take an action to exercise eminent domain, but I believe that action needs to be approved by a Superior Court judge. Because what is the use and necessity that you have to take, whether it's based on public health. So it's not an expedited process that you can get to the point of condemning a property if the property owner is current on their taxes. Because my understanding of that process is we also have to protect the property rights of an individual. And that what makes it a very complex issue. And whether the school district has a use for that property as a public agency, they can exercise their own eminent domain if that is the case. But I believe they have to prove the use and necessity.
Okay.
And this is just my understanding of that. By no means I'm providing you any legal advice.
No, I understood.
Yeah, no.
Okay, then agenda item number 4, emergency services, a resolution to enter an interlocal agreement for disaster recovery.
This is a resolution for your consideration, for you to consider getting into an interlocal agreement with the rest of the jurisdictions here in the county. And this is the result of the FEMA training. The Commissioner Messer, Commissioner Hutchins, myself, and other county staff, along with other elected officials here in the county, and administrative staff, also from local jurisdictions, where we attended a recovery plan in the event of a 9.2 earthquake magnitude. There was, I believe, during those 3 days, it was a great conversation. One of the subgroups, was all the elected officials got into a room and had a great conversation as to what is it that we need to do in case of our recovery strategies. One of the two deliverables or outcomes of those meetings was for the jurisdictions to consider passing a resolution to enter into an interlocal agreement. And that interlocal agreement will be setting the stage as to the roles and responsibilities as to how this group of elected officials will have to operate under the emergency situation if that comes to be. And again, this is the first step. We're going to make this available to all the different cities to see if they'd like to take the same action. And this is just the first step, making a statement that the county is serious about getting into an interlocal agreement. The interlocal agreement will have to follow. This is no part of this action that you may consider taking tomorrow.
Okay. Anything on that? Agenda item number 5, Public Works. And this is regarding Summit Lake Special Use District.
Yeah, last week you had a briefing related to the Summit Lake proposal to form a special use district within the Summit Lake area. You held a public hearing on April 2nd, 2019, and the staff gave you a briefing related to all the different public testimony that you received, and you also had your own perspective as to how that public testimony was given to you. That conversation occurred last week. The question that I asked for the board at that point, whether you would like to keep this item for your final consideration, and the majority of the board voted 2-1 to keep this item for you to exercise a formal vote tomorrow. Commissioner Edwards voted no on this. So what it does is you're not approving the formation of the special use district. Where you, if you consider this on a final vote, formal vote, where you allow the process to continue, and the property owners will have a special vote in which themselves will have to create this special use district if the majority of the voters decided to do so. And also among themselves will have to tax themselves as to how that works. You also heard a little bit the difference between the Lake Management District and the Special Use District. The Special Use District that's requested is a self-governed board, meaning they tax themselves, they generate revenue themselves, and they develop a work plan themselves as to how they need to address the water quality of the lake. Black Lake is a special use district, and this is similar to what Summit Lake would like to do. The Lake Management District is a little bit different. The Lake Management District is when the county provides administrative oversight of the financials, work plan, and everything else. But and also themselves, they have to vote in whether they'd like to form the Lake Management District, and they have to vote in taxing themselves. The election process is a little bit different. The Lake Management District, the election process can occur at any time, and the Special Use District has to be on a preset special election, whether it's August, November, or in this case, February. And that's how is the difference between the two.
Do you have any questions on that, Tony?
I think we beat that one down pretty good.
I just want to reiterate that this is a citizen-initiated special use district petition. And again, and as you said, Romero, this isn't the county doing it. It's not the county forcing. It's not the county collecting taxes. It's allowing the process to continue. That's all we're doing at this point, is allowing the process to continue, to go to a ballot measure.
Yeah, yes, and maybe
for those citizens and the residents there of Summit Lake to decide their own fate.
Yeah, maybe I can probably give a little bit of history as to how this came to be. Back in, I believe, September 2018, you received a formal request for you to consider the formation of a special youth district by, I believe, 11 citizens, which, according to the law, that meets the minimum standards of a petition. The next step in the process was for you to take that petition and ask the county engineer to go through the assessment, whether it's the feasibility and the next steps you need to take. The county engineer provided a formal report of the feasibility of this special use district back in December. And at that point, there was not necessarily an action by the board until we knew that was going to change the makeup of the board. So early in the year, then you decided to hold a public hearing related to this request, and that was happened in April the 2nd.
All right, and that'll be explained again tomorrow night. It's nothing that we're doing other than allowing the process to go forward.
And Tim Wilson will be there to walk you through the process.
I'll just point out that a lot of the arguments, there were arguments on both sides, and a lot of the arguments against having a special use district pointed to the county's septic management plan, which has not been, which would make sense if it were funded and active, but in light of that I think there's too many good arguments on both sides for us to say the process shouldn't go forward. Let the folks vote.
Right.
Got it. All right, moving on to number 6. 6A, we're going to hold for Commissioner Edwards, and I just saw him walk through the hall. So we're going to move on to 6B first, okay? And that's the call for sealed bids for official county newspaper.
Yeah, this is the what I call the yearly event in which we entertain bids for a proposal to secure the services of the official county newspaper. And with your authorization, we'll go secure bids. In the past, the Olympian has been the one who been selected to be the paper of record. And as soon as the bid process is completed, we'll bring the results to your attention, and then we'll award the contract.
Okay.
The
Any questions?
significance of the official county newspaper is about public notices and whatnot?
Yes,
Yeah.
so, and we need to establish by law what is the official county newspaper, and that's where we send all the public notices.
Got it.
On point.
So that was 6B, the official county newspaper of record. Any comments? No. Okay. So that takes us, then we'll back up to 6A, the ballot measure for the new courthouse and regional administrative building.
Yeah, and I have to apologize to Commissioner Edwards. Apparently, this appointment was not in your calendar, so I don't know what happened.
It was earlier in the weekend, but by this morning it was gone. Just so you know.
So
It's back now.
That's weird.
We got them.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay, so 6A.
So this item for your consideration is related to the courthouse and regional administrative building. And for your consideration was to whether you would like to take this particular item in front of the voters as a result of, as a means of a ballot measure. And the ballot measure, potential ballot measures to increase what we call the levy lift. That will be the evaluation per 1,000. So the proposal is to use 47 cents, additional 47 cents per 1,000 valuation as a means, a financial means to fund this courthouse and regional administrative services building. You set a public hearing for April the 23rd. That was last week, where you received written testimonies leading to the public hearing. 31 total written comments. Out of the 31, there were 8 in support, 12 against, and 11 miscellaneous. There was not necessarily related to the courthouse, to this project. During the public hearing, you receive a total of 17 oral testimonies last Tuesday. Out of the 17, 10 were in favor, 7 in opposition. Out of the 7 they were in opposition, 2 comments was in terms of if you decide to go and put this on the ballot, they recommend it to be in November. So leading to this, to the public hearing, there were 3 dates. The public was weighing in. One was the special election, August 6, 2019, November 5th, 2019, and the February 11th, 2020. One of the, perhaps the significant testimony that you received was from Mr. Pettit, and you have I gave you a copy early in the week of his comments, but also I give you a copy today for your consideration. So let me walk you through briefly as to the comments. Also, before you, in front of you, is a copy of the ordinance, draft ordinance that we had leading to the public hearing. It's right there, Commissioner, in your pocket.
It
Should be
is.
a copy of the ordinance.
Is the John Pettit letter, John Pettit letter in here
Yep.
as well?
Should be.
Got it?
Yep. And you also have a copy of Mr. Pettit's letter.
I don't have it here.
I don't have that.
Unless it's attached to something, it's not a standalone.
Yeah.
Looks like this, no?
Oh, this?
Yeah, here it
Yeah.
is. Got it.
Okay, got it, yeah.
It's here,
No.
part of this package.
Yeah, this is the Mr. Pettit's letter. So you do have all that in front of you, and also I give you a copy of the survey, which you had a public formal presentation of the survey last Thursday. So what I got out of Mr. Pettit's letter, a couple of items that he makes that comment. There is on the second page is whether the county really has the intent of building the courthouse, this project, and his label as this is an actual constructive fraud. And he cited a section of the ordinance that it starts with, if the Board of County Commissioners shall determine. And that section is located on the purpose section of the draft ordinance that is before you. So if in fact that language is there, but if you read the purpose on the second page of the ordinance, it starts from the top. It starts to construct a new courthouse, to construct a new administrative services building, to construct a new parking structure. It's very definite as to what the purpose and intent of this potential ballot measure will be. In the language that Mr. Pettit highlighted is on the third page on the top. Mm-hmm. And what it does is gives the board the ability to do something in the event, and this is just a normal process that we go through. For instance, for some reason this project doesn't materialize, whether it's an earthquake or something of those terms, then the board has the ability to do something with the revenue that has generated, approved by the voters. That is the intent of this language. So, and again, reading the whole section of purpose into context is a way to give flexibility to the board in the event this particular project doesn't materialize. But certainly, that is up to your purview, whether you like to add, delete, modify this section.
And that is if the board decides it to go to the ballot, it goes to the ballot. If it's approved, if it passes, that's what this applies to.
Right. And also, let's assume, assume the passes, is approved by the voters, is at 47 cents per 1,000. Based on the current economy, you can probably generate close to, let's say, $16 million, right? But, and that is based on what we have right now. But let's assume that probably the economy improves in the next years and you generate $17 or $18 million a year. With this language, you pay the debt of this particular project, but also gives you the ability to exercise your legislative duty to distribute the additional revenue. That is really to give you enough flexibility with this language to exercise your legislative authority. But again, addressing Mr. Pettit's comments, we have to, I believe, this is my point of view, you have to read the whole section, the purpose section, in the context of this. He also provided on the third page about the bonds, and he made a comment as to when the county has issued bonds. And on the right,
Can I stop you there and go back to the repayment issue that we're talking about? And it's also the last sentence of that section at the very top of page 3, that the county commissioners can apply the levy proceeds or any portion thereof to any other county purposes. Mm-hmm. That's the one. That's really what he's hanging his hat on. Is that statement?
right. And in the ordinance does say that, but again, it's predicated
So
on that gives the commissioners the flexibility.
Thank you.
Could I do a follow-up on that then?
Yes, I'm going to get another pen.
Here, I have one. Here, how about that one?
Now you can't.
No, okay. How about, is there maybe a provision that could be put in there for a sunset to satisfy that type of concern? You used the example of an earthquake. Okay, so something disastrous like that happens, that maybe within 1 year that particular tax would sunset if it was not going to be utilized for its intended or advertised purpose.
You have Elizabeth here, but and for instance, if this passes, this might just my understanding, and you have a briefing on the bond council coming up at 11, which that will be the perfect question to ask that.
Oh, good.
But my understanding, if, for instance, the project doesn't materialize, the legislative authority can stop any taxation anytime with further action at that time.
So we can shut it down on our own if we wanted or needed to. Okay.
So following up with Mr. Pettit's question, on the third page, he makes a comment of bonds. They have not been approved by the voters. And he is correct, but you as a legislative authority, you can issue bonds as long as you have the revenue to pay for it. So this particular ballot measure is not about issuing bonds. This particular ballot measure is to generate revenue, and then you issue the bonds for construction. So all the bonds that he has outlined in here, it is correct, and that's how the means and methods of which you have built the FJC, the jail, And the legislative authority has the option again to issue bonds as long as they have the revenue in place. And that's the exercise they have taken in the past.
Yeah.
So there's not a requirement that you need to go and ask every time you want to issue bonds to the public. Unless that, yeah.
Okay, I guess maybe his concern reflects what I feel the community does feel. There's not a lot of trust in the fact that government will do the right thing. I mean, I'll use the jail as an example. The jail was voted on twice by voters, and they disapproved that. And then the commissioners went ahead and did it, and commissioners come and go. And so what we might do today might not even tie in with the philosophy of a future board, for an example. So letting it go to the will of a new board, I understand why the community would be concerned and maybe not have the trust to leave that in place. So I think we're kind of premature on discussing this whole thing until after we have our bond council meeting at 11 o'clock today. I don't know how those two things happened, but I think they're out of order, to be honest with you, the cart before the horse or whatever. So I don't think that we ought to be taking any action on this until we hear a little bit more. I hate to take action anytime I hear, well, I'm not sure or I don't know, because this is a substantial action that this board could take. And probably the most important thing this board might take over the makeup of the current board. So
Well,
I'm not in a hurry.
Any action that we may take will be tomorrow night. And we're going to hear from bond council at 11 o'clock
Okay.
today. So
We're not, we're
just
going to
discussing-
just kind of discuss this in
we're
the
discussing
dark,
the
if
agenda
you
right
will.
now.
But we're kind of in the dark is all, that's all I'm saying. Kind of out of sequence, yeah, out of sequence, but maybe not. We're not going to take that official action, you're right. But the discussion, how can we have a valid discussion about things we don't know? That's my concern.
So revenue bonds. Mr. Pettit suggested that the board should do revenue bonds to the voters rather than a levy lift. And remember that the levy lift will go to the voters. So you wouldn't have the revenue to issue bonds if the voters didn't say yes to the levy lift. But the revenue bonds that Mr. Pettit is suggesting, all that is excess levy bonds, where it's what you see school districts put on the ballot. It allows the board to collect a property tax levy above and beyond your $1.80 limit. That's the difference. In any amount that the voters will approve. You're not limited to the $1.80, you're not limited to capacity between what we current levy and the $1.80. It's however much you put on the ballot. It's called an excess levy. For Mr. Pettit to call it a revenue bond is a little misleading. It doesn't matter what kind of bond you issue, there has to be revenue. It does not create revenue to the county. What it allows you to do is go out for a bond that's secured by an excess levy. The difference in the ballot between a excess levy and a levy lift is that a levy lift is a simple majority of the voters that turn out, and the excess levy is a supermajority with a minimum of 40% of the last general election, the last election. So that's the difference in the type of bond that he's suggesting running. And what you'll hear this morning from our bond counsel and bond advisor is that relatively speaking, Thurston County has a very small amount of debt. We are nowhere close to our bond capacity, and we are comparable, if not less than, other counties, comparable counties.
Okay.
But again, in the table that he provided to you on the third page, and it seems to be a little bit mixing some of the bonding definitions as Robin has stated. Because in this case, yeah, the county has issued bonds, and this includes bonds to construct the Tilly campus, the FJC, the jail. But as long as Robin said, as long as the county has capacity to pay the bonds with a specific revenue, then you are in the position to issue those bonds for construction, which the board has done it. And really, the measure before the board is whether they like to support generating revenue for a particular venture. In this case, it's the courthouse. So that was probably part of, he also makes a comparison between the different counties. Right now we have $1.22 per 1,000, he stated. And he makes a point that perhaps Clark County and I think Kitsap County, their rates a little bit below the $1.22. But at least from my point of view, that's a little bit hard because there's no one-for-one. It's based on the evaluation of each county and the inventory that each county has in terms of the properties. And that's how the $1.22, because for instance, the $1.22 can go down if the evaluation of the properties go up. So it's not a one-on-one relation between those counties, whether it's $1.99 or 99 cents per 1,000 versus the $1.22 per 1,000 that we have.
Can I go back to the language we talked about other county purposes if there's a contingency? So is it Elizabeth that drafts this ordinance for us?
With bond counsel.
Okay. And is this, I mean, how standard of a provision would this be in terms of this type of a?
So, can I just start?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I do ballot title reviews for, one of the functions of the prosecuting attorney's office is to do ballot title reviews of our jurisdictions here in Thurston County. So this type of provision, this catch-all, is common in school district ballot measures. I mean, their purpose is to, build a new school, improve certain functions of a school, but they do, if you read the resolution, every jurisdiction has to have a resolution like you're going to adopt. It captures all these nuances, such as if you can't go forward for whatever reason, the school district has authority to use the money as they see fit. So when I first drafted this resolution, I didn't have that provision in there. I just had it more strictly focused on the courthouse. But at Robin's direction or request, she wanted to have that catch-all because there are circumstances that come up, or there may be a circumstance where the courthouse project comes in under what was the budget was anticipated, so then you have a little bit of excess money, and you want the flexibility. This allows you the flexibility to use that as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I guess, I just wanted to make sure that, I always like to know, is this something kind of creative that we're doing that could potentially somebody could challenge in court, or is this a very standard sort of thing, and if somebody wanted to challenge it, they would have done so, and there'd be case law, and we would sort of know, and I just trying to get a sense of how, are we going out on a limb?
Can really speak directly to that, but I can say I've seen it in
Okay.
other district resolutions quite regularly.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
I still feel that this comes down to trust with the community, and I'm going to use the jail as a poor example because it didn't turn out very good for us. The voters said no a couple times, and the Board of County Commissioners decided to do something on their own without voter approval. And then it sat there empty for over 5 years. And the public is never gotten over that yet. I can tell you, if you talk to the sheriff today or the courts today, that location for that facility is not working out. It's not beneficial to the streamlining of the criminal justice system. So it's not been a benefit. I don't see the total amount that they went out for without a vote on here. Which one of these? It was around 2000 and somewhere between 2004 and 2008 that they did that, but I don't see that monetary amount, and it was something like $60 million.
That doesn't mean this is accurate.
No, I
Yeah.
know that. I'm just asking. I'm asking Robin.
This is the
It-
outstanding amount. This is not the issue amount.
Uh,
This is
okay.
how much we currently owe. And remember that we've refunded those bonds a few times to bring the total cost down. And you would not see a $60 million bond issue. You would see, it's my understanding, and Nancy has the history on it when we see her today, that we issued the bonds for the jail in a series rather than all at once.
Okay.
So you're not going to see the total amount on this list because this is what we currently owe. I will say that the jail is perhaps a poor analogy because we're paying the jail bonds for the most part out of detention sales tax, and that was passed by the voters. So there came a time when the voters voted yes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yes.
for the detention sales tax.
And that is a good example, for instance, of the detention sales tax pass, I think was 1996. And it has generated revenue, and it was not just intended to pay the construction of the jail, but also the board has exercised flexibility because the revenues have come higher where you funded correction officers, where you funded other activities not necessarily related
Well,
to
juvenile and family court was the
so
first thing.
it proves the point that I think having that flexibility in the language gives you, the board, the ability to do something if the revenues come higher than the obligation of that debt.
I just think the
So-
Elway poll does reflect a lack of trust by the community, and so I'm trying to address that.
Oh, that could be your take on it, yeah.
Sure.
This letter from John Pettit is public record.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
yeah.
So my question is this, Robin, when you said, talk about bond versus levy, that it was a little misleading. This is not going to intent on Mr. Pettit, but is it a little misleading or is it very misleading? Because I see some opining and general stances on this document, and I just want to know if it's not
I
accurate.
would not suggest that anything in here is not factual. Everything in here is factual, but things are taken out of context. And, revenue bond is a term of art that we don't necessarily use.
Okay.
It implies, and in fact, the young news reporter who was here on the evening of the public hearing was under the impression that a revenue bond created revenue. Well, it doesn't. It's still something that we have to pay off through some tax that's levied. So
Okay.
just the term is,
And I'm not impugning
And-
Mr.
and-
Pettit's character or his intent.
not
I
at
just
all.
wanted to find out
These are
how
facts,
misleading it
these
may
are
have been.
lifted out
But
of
also,
context.
and Commissioner Hutchins, the commissioner, others could perhaps remember this conversation. Early in the process, we had a conversation as to what will be the means and methods to finance this project. And at that time, the conversation was the general obligation bonds, as Robin has stated, 60% majority, 40% of the voter turnout the previous election versus the levy-led left. The levy-led left had limitations. limitations that we need to pay the debt within 9 years. And at that point, the board made the decision to engage the legislative delegation, which we were successful to have the payout of the levy deadlift to 25 years, only for Thurston County. So that conversation of what financial strategy was already happened way, I'll say probably in 2017, when we were successful on the 25-year levy lift. So that's the difference, is the general obligation bond and the levy lift versus issuing bonds for a specific purpose internal to the county.
Okay, good.
What about Mr. Pettit's? I mean, I was told that for a median home, we're looking at $12 a month or whatever, and he's claiming it's a 39.5% property tax increase, and somebody else parroted that, and somebody else at the public hearing said, well, gee, if that's the number, then no, I don't even support it. And I think he came in intending to support it. So I think it's when you're being asked how accurate the information in here is, that's not accurate, right?
Well, if you do the math, it does appear to be accurate. And we are currently collecting a little under 40 million. The increase would be roughly 15 to 16 million. So his numbers are right. It's 39.5% increase. If you look in your property tax, though, when you pay your property tax, I just paid mine, my $1,500 property tax bill isn't going to go up 39.5%. The portion that I pay for Thurston County General Fund is going to go up.
Okay, but that's totally different.
39.5%.
And that is absolutely
Yes.
misleading. He said that this is a 39.5% property tax increase. It is not.
Well,
So he
it-
didn't clarify that your Thurston County portion is a tiny, tiny subset. I pay
Right.
thousands and thousands of dollars in property tax.
Right.
And it's surely not going to go up 39.5%, or I won't vote for it.
Not the total, the total will not.
So-
And again, it's
Wow.
factual, but it's out of context. If you put it
I don't
in
even think
context.
it's not even factual based on what was said at the public testimony hearing. It may be factual in the, in the minutia of the 8-page document, but it was not factual as presented to the public at our hearing. And it influenced other people in the room.
Which it
So,
was, I'm sure.
I just don't want to have this discussion wrapped up and say that it was all 100% accurate.
And even this 39 can be even going even more, because depending on the valuation of the properties that we have in place. So it's taken out of context. It is factual, but it's not related.
That goes to my point that I was trying to make. How factual is this? Because it's very, I find it to be misleading. I'm not saying disingenuous, but it's misleading in the context in which it's proposed. Go ahead, Gary, we got to move on, but go
Okay,
ahead.
I guess, the court has ruled on misleading statements in the political arena. First of all, you don't have to tell the truth. They've made that perfectly clear. It's up to the voters to figure it out, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. So, you can probably count on seeing that in a con statement, that your property tax of the Thurston County share, or some verbiage in there that'll make it a true statement, but it's going to be out of context. And it is going to confuse the voters.
Yeah.
And so if you think about going back to trust and where we're at in our community, that's why I am so skeptical about moving ahead with this project, and that we're premature right now. Yes, the interest rates are great. Yes, we need to do something about the courthouse, especially the courts, but I just don't think the timing's right myself, and the Elway thing kind of proved it for me, but
Okay,
we've got more to cover here.
go right ahead, because we got to close this up.
Yeah, so I do have a request to the board, whether you would like to keep this item for tomorrow. On the agenda.
6A,
Yep.
yes.
I like to hear that.
For tomorrow night in the
Yeah.
BoCC meeting?
Yeah,
Oh, you mean keep it on the agenda?
yeah. And then you will exercise the vote.
Well,
and-
I'm not going to vote to keep it on the agenda, but I mean, I got two seatmates that might look at that differently.
Are we, I mean,
I think it's premature.
I want to talk, I think there's more to be, we need more time to discuss this today. And I mean, I'll cancel the rest of my day's appointments and sit here all day and talk about it if we need to. This is a huge decision, and I haven't even heard either of my seatmates' position about, well, I know where Commissioner Edwards is, I think, but I haven't heard the chair's position on what the because we would have to be deciding not just to place on the ballot, but which date.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to that.
If you like, we can, after you hear from the bond council, I can add another hour over lunch and then continue the conversation.
I would appreciate that if these guys are up for it.
I'm good for it.
I have the constituent coming in at noon and then at 1 o'clock.
Could that be a reschedule, Commissioner?
Perhaps. What are we discussing tomorrow morning in agenda setting?
We'll be discussing next week's agenda. The question is, if you discuss this agenda item tomorrow morning, you will not have the opportunity to change the agenda.
Oh, okay, got it.
And that's, the conversation needs to occur today.
Okay.
I mean,
I will have that constituent rescheduled then. I'll let my assistant know right away. And by 1 o'clock, I can push that down. So yes, if you can do that, facilitate that extra hour, that'd be fine.
Yeah, we'll add the additional.
But, hang
put in
on.
the master calendar.
But just to let you know, where I sit right now, I want it on tomorrow night's agenda. I'm not willing to remove it. Go ahead. Anything further? We got
No,
bond council coming in 2 minutes.
I would just like to clarify something with the county manager. I believe, and this might clarify with the voters as well, the reason that we need to figure this out, if you will, today and not tomorrow is because we're moving off campus for a meeting, and it has to have a 48-hour notice or something.
24.
Okay, 24, okay.
Where
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
to post the final agenda.
Okay,
So you will not be
there's
able
a
to.
timing
I got
issue
that, yeah.
is the,
That's the critical component.
Okay.
Yeah.
to meet those legal requirements.
Well, that satisfies that completes the tomorrow night agenda for Tuesday, the 30th of April in Rochester. And let's go ahead and take a 1 minute break or 2 minute break. Bond council's coming in at 11.
Yeah, and I will
That's
add
momentarily.
I will add over lunch, continue the conversation on.
and if
on
bond
this.
council takes a little less, we can just segue into
Jump right
it
in.
and.
But
maybe
just to
get
make sure, I need to add it on the master calendar.
And when are we going to talk about CBG?
Tomorrow.
This is tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I don't know why that.
I didn't
paper
either.
was in
I
front
didn't
of
see it
me.
anywhere else. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Minutes to set up.
Thank you. Bye, folks.
So bond council, that meeting is not going to be streamed? Is that,
I don't know.
is it? Is bond council going to be streamed?
Yes, we'll stream that.
Okay.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Is your mic on?
Yes. Yep.
Good. We're ready, Brian.
I may ask you to move around the mic as you.
Will you shut doors? Thank you. All right, welcome back if you're watching at home. We're going into a briefing now with our bond counsel. And by way of introduction, I'm John Hutchings.
Ty Menser.
Gary Edwards?
Robin Campbell.
Ramiro Chavez, County Manager.
Oh, sorry, here, ma'am.
Stacey Awasaki, Foster Pepper. Nancy Nearest, Bond Counsel, Foster Pepper. We're both Bond Counsel.
Duncan Brown with PFM, the county's financial advisor.
Stephen Amano, also with PFM.
Great, thank you very much. And who's going to kick this off?
I think I will kick us off, if that's all right. We were asked collectively to come down and provide just sort of a high-level background on debt issuance by Washington counties. What types of debt do counties issue? What is the process for issuing that debt? What sort of parties are involved in issuing that debt? What are some of the key steps? And also, what are some of the key sort of legal frameworks and concepts that are important for any issuer of municipal debt to understand? And so this presentation may look somewhat familiar because it's based on a presentation that this group gave a few years back. We've tried to update it as necessary, but it's generally the same concepts.
So Duncan, this is not only just overview of what we can, shouldn't do, but it's also specific to the courthouse administrative building?
I think we tried to make this fairly broad, but we're happy to, I think we'll be speaking to it in the context of what the county's near-term debt issues may be.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I speak for all of us when I say we're happy to entertain questions along the way. This is not intended as a
You got it.
presentation per se. Well, I thought I'd start just by, we'll do some introductions of, we just did introductions. So we're in the introductions section. I thought maybe in a second we'll talk a bit about what our groups do and how that relates to the county's debt issuance. Just before we get there, I'll mention just briefly what all the parties are involved in a traditional bond financing. Obviously, there's the county. The county would be the issuer of any county debt. You also have a bond counsel firm, Foster Pepper, a financial advisor, PFM, and an underwriting firm, which is an investment bank that actually buys the bonds and resells those bonds to institutional investors and retail individual investors. And per the county's debt policy, that underwriting firm is typically selected through a competitive auction of the bonds. And we'll get to that policy in a minute. You also have a bond rating agency, which provides a credit rating or a credit score based on the county's sort of economic, demographic, financial profile. Again, we'll talk about what a rating really means momentarily. And a couple of sort of smaller entities with smaller roles, like the fiscal agent, who actually makes sure, I shouldn't say it's a small role, maybe the most important, make sure that the county pays the holders of its debt with principal and interest is due. There are some other parties that may be involved for specific types of transactions. Those are kind of the main ones. You see the two in front of you, the two firms represented here, really sit on the same side of the table as the county on any transaction. We have a fiduciary responsibility to provide advice and recommendations in the county's best interest. But that's sort of the team in a nutshell. Nancy, do you want to speak a little bit about what bond counsel does?
And Nancy, you have to get that microphone right close to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I have been bond counsel to the county since probably about 1990 or so. And it is required by bond investors to have an outside and a specialized firm that ends up ultimately giving an opinion to the investors and the county that the bonds are valid and that the interest is tax exempt. And this is a role that's been around for years and years. So we work with Robin and Elizabeth, but represent the county. And that's what we've done. So have worked on all your debt for a long time. As bond counsel, council, in it, we ultimately give that opinion, but we draft the resolution ordinance authorizing the bonds. I've been working with the county on the levy lift, and Elizabeth have been helping her on the ordinance. That would be the putting it before the voters if you decide to do that. So I have a hand in a number of things. We kind of unusually for lawyers, we have an agreement with the county, and if you use us, then we have a fee schedule. So we charge when and if bonds are issued, which is somewhat unusual for lawyers. So happy to answer questions and be involved along the way. So Stacy and I work together. We, as bond counsel, you're subject to securities laws, federal tax law, state law. So our opinion encompasses all of those, and we'll get just a little bit into those subjects.
And turning the page, the county's financial advisor, as we've been doing, provides advice related to debt affordability, different means of financing and funding projects. If and when there is an actual transaction, we play sort of a coordination role in that, in working closely with county staff and bond counsel to ensure that the disclosure documents are prepared, that the county receives a credit rating, and that the bond structure meets the county's expectations and goals prior to actually selling the debt. And again, we have fiduciary responsibilities, so we're not an investment bank. We're not. We sit on the county side of a transaction and provide advice in its best interests. And I'll flip forward here, just getting into the meat of the matter, which is what is it that counties in Washington State can do? We talk a lot about bonds, and bonds are the most common way of any municipality across the country of financing capital projects. But bonds can mean a lot of different things. We often mean that a bond issue, I mentioned it at the very beginning, a bond issue is typically sold with an investment bank, who then purchases the bonds and resells to smaller investors. But there are also, at its core, a bond is really just a loan, just like, not to be reductive, but it's similar to a home loan, to a car loan, to a student loan in many respects. And the bond market, public bond market, is not the only way of borrowing money. There are also state loans, Public Works Trust Fund. There is bank financing. It's increasingly common for smaller bond issues to be sold just directly to a commercial bank, and that's a single investor. We also have some state loans, which are less applicable for larger jurisdictions, or excuse me, federal loans, which are less applicable for large, more urban jurisdictions, but you see them often in rural areas, USDA, Rural Development Loan Program. All of that can walk and talk pretty similar to a bond issue. One thing we'll talk about in a little while is tax exemption. And I know we've talked about this in the context of courthouse financing, is how to preserve the tax exemption on interest of that debt. And that's part of the bond counsel's opinion, is that the debt is being financed for a purpose that qualifies it for federal, for exemption from federal income tax. And that exemption allows the investor, or makes the investor willing to accept a lower interest rate on the debt that's being issued. And that lower interest rate obviously translates to a lower cost of borrowing for the issuer or the county. And so we talk a lot about wanting to preserve that tax exemption because it can have real value in reducing interest costs for local governments. But it's not always necessarily the best way of doing things. That there are instances when a taxable financing may be more appropriate or may provide more flexibility even at a higher cost. But that's a key part of what we do, is look at tax exemption.
The rule of thumb historically, it's saved you about a 1.5%, and that varies, but if you could borrow and tax exempt at 3.5, it would be taxable when, closer to 5 historically for longer term debt, which is real savings over a long term.
So that's just a very brief overview of some of the different types. What is a bond in this context? Again, it's just a loan, sold, chopped up and sold to a bunch of different investors, basically. As far as the types of debt issuance, Nancy, will you speak about that?
So as mentioned, state law governs the types of debt and most terms of debt that can be issued. And there are several different kinds. There's general obligation debt, and that's payable from property taxes and other legally available funds. It's also secured by the full faith and credit of the county. So those can be in a couple different forms. There's non-voted general obligation debt, and we also call that limited tax general obligation debt, or LTGO bonds. And they require the approval of Board of County Commissioners, but no vote from the electorate. And then there's voted general obligation bonds, unlimited tax general obligation bonds, or UTGO bonds. And those require 60% vote of the voters, payable from excess property taxes. In terms of your courthouse, the type of bond would actually be the non-voted, the LTGO bond, even though there was a vote, because it's from a levy business. There's also revenue debt, payable from revenues of a particular utility or enterprise. So typically water, sewer, electric, solid waste, and no statutory limit on the amount of debt that can be issued under revenue debt. But there could be the need to meet other covenant restrictions, maybe that debt service coverage requirement or other types of requirement from your bond resolution. And actually, the county doesn't have any revenue debt outstanding.
You only have limited tax general obligation debt outstanding, and you have for years. That is the only type of debt you have.
And then there's also local improvement, or LID, or road improvement district, RID bonds, assessment bonds payable from assessments levied against the property that will be benefited by those special improvements. And you had a few of those in the 90s.
They're like ground mound, so it's where you are going to do a road project or a utility project to serve a specific area, and you can create a district and have a group of property owners that's benefited from that improvement pay all or part of the cost of that. And it's something, you did some, it's fairly time consuming, but it can be, a good mechanism and something to be aware of as a possibility to finance.
So voted debt, UTGO bonds, they require 60% approval from the voters and a 40% validation, which means that 40% of those who voted in the most recent general election need to turn out for the vote. Voters would be asked to approve the maximum dollar amount of the bonds, and then a maximum term, and then also the specific capital purpose for the proceeds of those bonds to be used for. So the affirmative vote approves the issuance of the bonds and in excess property taxes, which means it's not paid from your general operating levy, but from an additional tax.
And these are not, I would say, commonly used. They are used by some counties, but it's not extremely common to see voted general obligation bonds used by counties specifically. You see them used very, very often by school districts. So when you think of a school district bond election, that's exactly what this is.
It's, the 60% is really hard to get. So again, they are very lovely if you can get them, because you have some extra debt capacity. You only have, the taxes can only go for paying those, are very secure. But again, as Duncan said, because of that 60%, it's hard to get that approval.
Aren't there also limitations on how those proceeds can be used?
Only capital.
Only for capital?
And not, it's in the Constitution, the state constitution, and kind of peculiarly, you cannot use it to replace equipment, so it's just for capital.
So if you were to go with this type of a bond, part of the limitation here that the levy lift is going to be a little easier on, if you will, is the need for a certain amount of M&O costs to be replaced as we go. So that we can do that with a levy lift. This type of bond can only be used for construction. So it's very narrow.
And actually only to pay bonds for construction. You
Right.
can't even pay as you go. You have to just, it's
Oh.
solely to pay debt service on bonds that have been, approved. You could get a bank loan and then, to start construction if you wanted to. One thing that's just probably worth mentioning, this debt can be short or long-term. And so with this courthouse project, you could get a bank loan, for example, to get some construction money, for design if you wanted to, like a line of credit, and then issue your bonds in a year or two. That bank line of credit is an LT, limited tax general obligation debt of yours. It just happens to be short-term. So it can be short or long-term. So I'll just talk, and I know this is on your mind, and you have quite a bit of knowledge, but, just happy to talk a little bit about levy lifts, and again, contrast them to the voted bonds. So a levy lid lift, and this is confusing, and it's confusing to articulate it to the public. It is allowing you to raise your regular property tax rate, theoretic, as much as you are asking the voters for, up to your maximum statutory authorization. And under state law, you can ask the voters to raise it for a limited period or indefinitely, and for specified purposes or a broad purpose. So you could have a levy lid lift that says, in order to finance county purposes, we're going to raise our levy for as long as we want, if you would like. If one of the purposes is to pay bonds, debt service, then it's limited, typically 9 years. You had got the legislation, so you can go up to 25 years. So and then with this type, there's two types of levy lid lifts. And the one that's relevant to you, as you know from reading the ordinance, is you ask the voters, you have to start levying it in the next calendar year after your election. You cannot delay it. And what you say is, if your rate right now is, $1 and 40-something cents. And so you're saying, we're asking you to authorize us to raise it, in your case, to $1.69 in 2020, if you had the election this year. And then every subsequent year, you can raise it by the statutory allowed maximum, which is currently the 1%. And then at the end of 25 years, you go back to the 2019 amount, and assuming that you would have raised that 2019 amount by the statutory maximum all those 25 years. And that's what your levy will be in year 26. And again, you can, under state law, you could say solely to construct the new facility, including to pay bonds. You could say to construct and operate the building. You could say for other purposes, or for other facility purposes, or the third purpose would be to buy parks. I mean, you really have an ability to say multiple or limited purposes, but then again, you want to let the voters know what they are voting for. And then, you know, as Stacy mentioned, then you will issue, which is not intuitive, you will issue these non-voted general obligation bonds and payable from this regular property tax, that increased amount, and then other available funds. So if you didn't need to levy the full amount in the future, you don't, a board could decide not to, and then bank that extra capacity, which you may or may not ever use, if you would like.
Are we going to be taking questions along the way?
I don't plan on taking questions. I plan on maybe asking questions.
Feel free to, so I think we hope to have
That's
this
true.
be-
But are we going to do that along the way, or are we going to?
I would prefer if you finish, only because we're 11:30, and we got to get, I want to hear everything that they have to offer, and then we can, they may ask questions
Okay.
along the way, or
Fair enough.
answer our questions.
Okay.
That's my answer.
We'll definitely allow time for questions.
Okay.
So I think Stephen will speak briefly on the county's debt policy.
Yeah, so the county has a debt policy in place. It's required by statute that the county has that in place. It was last updated in 2015. The debt policy is really kind of a way to formalize best practices and procedures related to the issuance of debt, and then kind of the ongoing management of covenants and requirements that are associated with that debt issuance. You see here kind of Stacy hit on, you know, the different types of debt that a county can issue. Here are the you know, listed here are the types that the county is authorized in its policy. And in particular, a method of sale is designated within that policy as competitive sale is really the type that's the county has historically used and is kind of the primary means of selling bonds. Negotiated sales could also be used with additional approval.
Well, it's probably worth mentioning, if you get a bank loan, you could just go to one bank, or you oftentimes send out kind of a request for proposals to 20 banks and say, we're interested in borrowing X amount of money, what's your rate in any other terms?
And then on page 13 here, we have some other kind of key points that are included in the debt policy, you know, such as the kind of term of the bonds and the you know, savings thresholds in a refinancing transaction. The last two bullets there are kind of key in terms of the ongoing management of you know, requirements associated with debt issuance. So when the county issues its bonds to the public market, it essentially makes a promise to the marketplace that it will provide certain information annually so that investors can continue to understand the county's financial position and sort of the economic profile. So that's, you know, outlined there in the debt policy. And then another point is sort of the annual requirement to understand what sort of the arbitrage, complete the arbitrage rebate calculation. So effectively, you know, I guess simply stated, if the county borrows funds at 3%, it can't then go and invest those funds at a higher rate and profit from that difference, right? So that's kind of another reporting requirement associated with debt issuance.
And that's a function of federal tax code, which I think Nancy will speak to, Nancy or Stacy will speak to in a moment here as far as tax compliance. Do either one of you want to speak about authorizing debt?
So in 2011, the statutes were amended to provide an option for a resolution to delegate certain authority to the boards to, for them to authorize a bond issuance to an authorized designated representative, which is consistent with the county's debt policy. So in 2010 and 2009, this is how the county issued their debt. You adopted a bond resolution, and then after the competitive sale, then you came back to you, and then you approved a sale resolution. So this change to the statutes is helpful because it gives more flexibility. Now you just adopt one bond resolution that authorizes a designated representative, usually assistant county manager or the treasurer or somebody that we choose, or you guys choose, to conduct the sale within certain parameters. And the parameters could include maximum principal amount, date by when the bonds should be issued, maximum interest rate, true interest cost maximum, and then also if it's for refunding, how much savings is required. So so again, started using this delegation resolution method with your 2015 bonds.
So this allowed us to choose a date. What we would do is on a Tuesday morning, we'd run the auction just before the board meeting, and then we'd run into the board meeting and have the board vote to approve them right then, so that we could conduct the rest of the sale. Being able to designate, we're able to pick a date that makes more sense to our best advantage, rather than a fixed Tuesday morning when I can run in and say, okay, approve this right now. So this works to the county's advantage, and as Stacy said, you've been doing this since 2015. You've delegated authority to me within certain limits. And I never go out for bonds without making sure that you're okay with that.
Good.
But this works to our advantage.
Allows you to have sales on a Wednesday morning.
Right.
Yeah.
So Stephen's going to talk just briefly about the county's existing LTGO debt.
Yep, so we talked a lot about kind of debt in theory. On page 16 here, you see kind of what the county has issued, currently has outstanding in terms of bonds. I believe we mentioned earlier, these are all limited tax general obligation bonds. Something you'll notice is there is a column there with a call date. That's kind of the time when the county has the ability to prepay or refinance the bonds. So something that our role as financial advisors includes is to kind of monitor those upcoming call dates and see if there could potentially be an opportunity for the county to save or refinance and save through that means. There's about $55.5 million of LTGO debt outstanding.
And the next call dates are opportunities for refinancing coming up next December 2020. So we'll keep an eye on those now.
Then on page 17 here, you'll see really the debt limits that really the county has to stay within. For LTGO or non-voted debt, it's 1.5% of assessed value. For voted debt, or total debt capacity, including voted debt, it's 2.5% of assessed value, so it's really driven by assessed value of properties within the county. Really, this is kind of one of the tests that the county would have to meet to issue debt, but it's not, I would say it's not typically kind of a test that you would have trouble meeting. As you see here, there's 500 million or so of capacity of non-voted debt and about 800 million of voted of total capacity. I think really more the issue is identifying a repayment source for that debt rather than if the capacity is there.
And it's just the principal amount of your debt that counts towards this assessed value. So it's not interest, it's just principal.
Yeah, there are some taxing districts that have lower thresholds for which this is more meaningful. For the county, this is sort of a check. For counties throughout the state, this is typically a sort of check the box exercise. When we talk about debt capacity, this is one element of debt capacity, but the more limiting factor, as Stephen mentioned, is how do you repay the debt? Not how does it relate to your assessed value, but what's the source of your payment and what are the risks and benefits there. And that's one of the key things that rating agencies look at. You mentioned beginning, credit ratings are really required for any public issuance of bonds, so not a bank loan and not a public works trust fund loan, but for any bond issue that is sold to the public markets, really these days does require at least one credit rating. There are three major rating agencies: Moody's, was Standard & Poor's, now just S&P, and Fitch, and they review municipalities throughout the country as well as other sectors and private businesses, but we're talking about municipalities. And they all publish written criteria by which they evaluate issuers of municipal debt. Those criteria are listed here at the bottom of the slide. Some of these are within the control of the local government. Some of them are not. The economy and tax base, which is a key factor for any tax-backed debt, is generally outside the control of the government general fund is often, at least to some extent, within the control of the issuer. The institutional framework, which is a way of saying statutory revenue rating abilities, typically functions of state law, and so that's again outside the ability of the issuer to control. The county has currently maintains a rating from S&P, and that rating is AA. You can see here the tiny little Thurston County logo next to the AA rating. And all three of the major rating agencies use more or less the same type of scorecard. The investment grade ratings are up there in yellow, non-investment grade are in blue. Fortunately for us, there are, you don't see a whole lot of non-investment grade ratings for local governments in the Northwest. Tend to be in the single A or double A category, some in the triple A category. And these are the categories. There are gradations within these categories. So you see some issuers with a AA minus or AA plus. The county is rated AA, so right in the middle of that AA category. The last time that S&P did sort of a deep dive review of the county was 2016 in connection with its 2016 bond issue. And for any new bond issue, the county would go through a similar exercise, and that would be an exercise coordinated on PFN and county staff to put together a presentation of the county best light and apply for that credit rating. Depending on the size of the bond issue, it may be advisable to seek a second credit rating as well, and that's something we would make a recommendation on at the time of the transaction. So here just listed a couple of key strengths and weaknesses. The county has strong liquidity and low debt levels. The economy is obviously a credit strength here. Weakness, really just fund balance expectations. It was expected to, at the time this rating report was prepared, that the fund balance was expected to decrease over the coming years. And it has. But it's always best, when setting those expectations is probably the most important thing. And so it's better to communicate that to the rating agency and say, we expect this to happen, and then have it happen, rather than not say anything and have it happen. And so that gets a lot of credit for that.
We also got some really strong feedback about strong management, because we've been able to demonstrate that when we see the fund balance going down, the board takes action to shore it up. So that was also
Good.
noted in the report.
In the context of any non-voted debt for the CRAB, one of the key conversation points would be about how that levy lift, how those dollars are managed, and how they're allocated. So that would be an interesting conversation, just because it's somewhat unfamiliar territory for the rating analysts. Tax law.
Yeah, tax law. I'll just be very brief, but what's important, I think, for you to know is that you have tax exempt debt outstanding. Some of them are a little unique, but still it's basically tax exempt. And the hope would be that you could issue tax exempt debt for the administration building. But with that comes a myriad of federal tax regulations and laws and restrictions. And the bottom line is, through the life of your tax exempt bonds, it basically needs to generally be governmentally used, because private parties don't get the benefit of tax exempt financing. So there's real limitations, and generally no more than 10% of your facility can be privately used. So the classic is if you finance a building, you could lease for the life of your bonds 10% of it. And the federal government is a private party, as are nonprofits. Governmental entities are not. So in your new courthouse administration facility, if you said, we want to build it a little bigger than the county needs initially, you could rent it out to the state, you could rent it out to the city of Olympia, and you would be fine. But if you rented out 20% of it to private parties, the federal government, nonprofits, you would not be able to issue tax-exempt debt for that portion. This has come up with, as you've looked over the years through your restitution center, leasing some of it to the federal government, for example. That can impact your tax-exempt debt. So if, for example, you did want to lease 30% to the federal government, you would have to pay down some of that debt. You could issue taxable debt in order to pay that. You would have to take some action.
Or just use current year tax dollars to fund
To pay,
that
right,
portion.
right, yes.
Cash, equity helps buy down that exposure.
And then generally too, there's limitations. This doesn't tend to come up with you, but private managers, so if you wanted to hire a private manager, that might be okay, but there's some issues. So again, when you have private parties, typically with county facilities, it really is for county operated, county use, but these issues come up and it's something to be aware of. And the alternative, if you think, for example, on the administration building, if you're going to use cash, you could say, okay, we're gonna have a parking garage, but we wanna actually have other parties be able to use it and maybe lease some of it out. You can use cash for a part of that parking facility, or you could issue part of your bond as taxable if you wanted flexibility to lease them out. But you can have some, so if you had a privately managed a little cafeteria, that's probably fine, because you can have a little private use. But it's an issue. Something Robin's very familiar with.
Yes.
So in addition to the tax laws, there's also securities laws that govern municipal bonds, and several of them. Some, again, we work quite extensively on with Robin and other county staff. But one that comes up is Securities and Exchange Commission Rule 10b-5, which provides the first three bullets that it's unlawful directly or indirectly in connection with the purchase and sale of securities to employ any device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, make any untrue statement of a material fact, or omit to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements made in light of the circumstances under which they were made, not misleading, or engage in any act, practice, or course of business which operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon any person. So for your underwritten bond issues, you publicly sold bond issues, you prepare an official statement which has a bunch of information about the securities, the project being financed or bonds being refinanced, and about the county. And again, we work extensively with Robin and other county staff to prepare this document. It also includes your financial statements. And so, again, this is one of the documents necessary for investors to evaluate the security and whether or not they want to invest. Again, the second bullet talks about material facts. So materiality is an objective standard. It's the substantial likelihood that under all the circumstances, a fact would assume actual significance in the deliberations of a reasonable investor. I think it's helpful, but it's kind of the standard we go by. And issuers are responsible for the content of the disclosure documents and may be liable for misleading disclosure.
So I read that big fat document, and I usually read it twice because it's hard to read. Yes, and it's also reviewed by Darren Bennett in the auditor's office and Ann Lundeen in the treasurer's office, so that we know that we've got all the facts right in that document before we sign off on it.
The key is you have to include, both positive and negatives, and it's it's not a Chamber of Commerce piece. It's very kind of dry and not a lot of adjectives typically, but when you do one, the more folks that are looking at it and, thinking, gee, this isn't that clear, or boy, we forgot to talk about this, is very helpful.
Right.
So feel free, everybody, to read it and comment, because we appreciate that.
Yeah, and I don't think we want to get into it necessarily, but there have been in recent years more examples of folks getting in trouble SEC, issuers getting in trouble with the SEC for either not mere oversights, but actual fraudulent misstatements or misinformation.
All right.
It's not happening in your county.
Not here, no.
No.
We want to make sure that it doesn't happen. So we have some information in the appendix regarding mostly bond market and sort of interest rates and yield curves. But I wonder if, in the interest of time, we might want to
Start with questions?
see if there's things that we can answer. with the-
Yeah, let's do that. I'm gonna start with Ty. Okay, start with Gary, go ahead.
So there is a way, if we were to build a 10-story building, I'm just using this as an example, to rent out the top floor, 10%, I guess. And that,
Yes.
the way we were but could it be configured, say we're trying to construct a 50-story or a 100-year building, and we're gonna need 5 floors initially, and we've got 5 floors. How could we build 5 more floors so we could advance into those over the next 100-year period? Would we have to partner with a private entity to do that, or is that doable? Or do you have to do a completely different bonding source, or what's the deal?
So again,
Or is that too
if you're
broad?
going to lease it out to the city of Olympia, for example,
Then it would be
that's
okay,
fine.
right?
Or the state of Washington, or, you know, other governmental, non-federal entities. So if you want to, you can, again, if you're gonna contribute cash, or you know, you have some other sources, you can basically allocate it and saying, we are going to, you know, pay, we have X million that we're gonna contribute, and it is going to be used for these floors. That's what we're using it for. And then you can rent that out, and you don't have to consider it. Or, again, it's possible to borrow some of your money on a taxable basis, so the interest is not tax exempt, and then there's no restrictions. You could, you know, if you did 30% of your bond financing is taxable, you could rent out 30% and not worry about it. So there are some things too.
Okay.
And that's one of the things we have been talking about in terms
Yes.
of on the plan finance side is at what point would bonds actually be issued? Because in the initial, as Nancy mentioned, the levy lift that's being considered would be required to be taken in year 1. And the county may or may not be in a position to actually issue debt that quickly relative to the project. So would it just be those current year tax dollars that would be allocated to capital spending? Those don't have the same consideration. That's equity, that's cash, that can help.
And even if it's all, so again, you spend a bunch of money in your first year or 2 before you issue bonds, and you can say, that is going towards what we might private use. So there's a fair amount of ability to help.
Structure.
And,
Let me get Ty, and then we'll get back to you again. Gotta go back and forth, because we're running out of
Okay.
time. Go ahead.
You mentioned Public Works Trust Fund, Assistance Fund, or whatever that's called. Where does that come into play? What kind of projects are appropriate for that?
Those tend to be small, well, when the Public Works Trust Assistance Account is actually funded by the state legislature, those loans tend to be for smaller sewer, water projects, roads projects. You know, we mentioned them initially because that's one form of debt, broadly speaking, along with bank loans, bond issues, other types of state and federal loans, but I don't think it has much applicability to the courthouse project.
It would not be available to us for this courthouse
I mean, the
project.
state has rated that fund in the
Yeah,
last.
it's not
years.
well funded, and they prioritize generally what types of projects that they fund, usually small sewer systems.
Just curious for future reference.
Go ahead, Gary.
where
You
we,
have a few state loans, you know, so you have got.
We do, ecology loan, yeah.
where are we at in comparison to other counties in the state of Washington? When you showed that rating chart and you had our little icon there. So is there a list somewhere that we can look and see how we stack up against the 39 other counties?
I think we actually had that list in the earlier version of this a couple of years ago. So we can, most counties are in the AA category. So either typically one notch, either at the same rating level as Thurston County or one notch below or above. We can provide that.
And ending fund balances on the general fund budget or something, that makes a difference, how we might rate.
It does.
One of the elements.
Yes.
One of the differences, sure.
One more little question. One question I didn't get to answer in the last briefing, and maybe you guys know the answer, is if we had, in our resolution, we have some contingency language, if there was an earthquake or we can't finish the project, we could use the money for other purposes. My question is, if we didn't have that, and you've just authorized the bonds for these limited purposes of constructing courthouse, parking structure, what happens then if you?
Then,
If
if
you're-
you literally don't need the money for those purposes, then you just would levy less, because you don't have the ability to spend it on other purposes. So, you know, you would levy it in a year, and then you would just the next year levy less, because you don't need as much. So it's really what you've told the voters. And then, whether it's a voted bond issue, like a school district, you know, you can say, have broadish purposes, and a levy lift or not, and then you really are stuck with what you asked voters and told voters.
Okay.
Or we could rescind it.
No.
It's automatic.
Because it's an election, well, I guess you could perhaps have another election, but I've never seen that. But really, again, if you said the only purpose is to, you know, construct this facility and to pay bonds, you would be limited to that. Again, it's fine to be, and, you know, funds are, that's your main purpose, that's what you intend. And if you say, and if, you know, other county purposes approved by the board, then you have the broad, you know, authority to do other things.
Right, but if we take out that and other purposes, and something major happens and we cannot use the money for that purpose,
Right.
we cannot rescind it and say, tap, tap, we don't need it anymore, we're done?
Rescind the levy, yes, you could basically, so if for some reason you ended up only building a little bit of the building or not building at all, you would then just not levy, or not levy the whole amount.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Did you have something?
No,
That was it.
that's the
Gary, go ahead.
clarification. that
Yeah, on page 20, I didn't understand where you talk about 22.3 times governmental debt service. That didn't make any sense to me, so I didn't know what you were talking about there. On that bullet, under strengths.
And this is taken verbatim from the S&P report, so we didn't write this, just to be clear. That is essentially looking at the county's liquidity, its available cash relative to its annual debt service requirements on existing bonds, and saying the amount of liquidity available is 22 times the annual debt service payment, which is, again, very strong, and was a credit positive in getting that doubling in 2016.
Okay, on the truthfulness portion of, it almost sounded like okay, if you're selling a house, you have to disclose that, I don't know, there was a meth lab there, or there was a mass murder, or something like that. How far do you have to go into disclosure when you do this? Do you have to disclose that you're going to put this in the middle of a area that's people poop in the doorways and there's a bunch of homeless living around there and it hadn't been handled right? Do you have to tell the public that? Or is that just assumed that they know that?
Well, I think the primary focus of the POS and the rating conversation, for that matter, is maybe less around the project itself and more around the county's financial.
It's more about
Can you
factual
pay?
financial issues than physical
Right.
problems or something.
The investor cares maybe a little less about how bonds are being
Okay.
used. Still disclose that, but they care mostly about how they're going to get paid back.
And just to be clear, there's nobody currently that I'm aware of that's pooping in the City Hall of Olympia right now at the Justice Center. Okay.
And again, there's some projects where the only source of repayment is the project, but that's not your case. So even if the building isn't as nice as you expected or as popular among staff or whatever, you still have to pay this bond,
Any final questions? 'Cause we gotta wrap
Just
it up.
one real quick. Why did the fish plant, or 3400 building, why was that not able to be, the debt be called, so we could pay that off? I'm just curious why that isn't allowed. I'm using that as an example, but maybe any example. Why would you allow it to be
It's-
called or
it's one
not
of
be
the
called?
It's not,
Right.
it's not just, it's not a single bond for that building. That building
That,
has
okay.
other,
Okay, other
other
things attached
obligation.
to that, other obligations,
But
okay.
even so, even if we were to carve out that portion, recall that one of these pages shows when our debt can be called.
Yes, that's it.
That is essentially, when can you pay part of it off or
Yes.
all of it off? We can't do that for a few years. When you issue the bonds, they come with the dates of when you can pay them. It's like.
Oh, so
some-
there is a date certain?
Yes.
Okay, good enough. That's what I needed
It's
to know.
10 years. The kind of the standard is after 10 years, you can prepay amounts without penalty. You could have it be 5 years, but you would have a higher interest rate.
Well, this one we've had for 20 years, though.
Well, I think that the
That's my
date's
question.
coming up in 2020, because didn't we do those with the QECB? It seems like we used the QECB bonds, possibly the Build America bonds.
And those are callable next year.
Right.
A portion of the 3400 building renovation was attached to 2009 bonds, and those were refinanced. So
You're right. Portions of
Yeah,
that was refinanced
those
in
are not
2016.
callable.
And that 10-year window.
Expands. Oh, okay, I
Right.
got it.
So it's all based on what the agreement is when you sell the bonds.
Okay.
Beautiful. Stacy, Nancy, Duncan, Stephen, thank you very much.
Nice to be here.
Before you go, we've been having some just high-level conversations with the city of Olympia. And according to their finance person, you have apparently told them that they could not enter into a lease with us?
No, I actually said the opposite.
Okay.
Okay, that
We
was
thought
our
that
understanding.
sounded odd, but we wanted to
No,
verify.
I think it would be debt, the debt of theirs.
Right.
But yes, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
Thank
it was
you.
the opposite, that yes, cities and counties can lease,
See, that answers the
and
question.
if it's a capital lease, it's debt, but yeah, you both have authority to do leases. Yeah.
Right, and they are limited to the 9 years where we have a 25-year.
Right,
If they
so
were to
if-
go to the
if
bond or
They
the
had
levy
a
limit.
levy lid lift, for the purpose of paying lease payments in 9 years.
Right.
Robin, do you need a
Thank you,
note? Do you need a note to show Olympia?
No, I think that
Doctor's note.
it might be helpful for us to,
Translate.
yeah, just connect with their finance
Okay,
person.
good, thank
Yeah,
you.
I think, yeah.
Thank you so much for this, appreciate it. It helps quite a bit. All right, 5-minute break, and then we'll come right back and kick into the next discussion. Thank you. Are we going to be live streaming the next discussion? Romero, are we going to live stream the next hour? All right, welcome back. And it's still April 29, 2019, and this next hour or so is dedicated to talking about Courthouse and Regional Administration Building project. And so we just finished an hour with our bond counsel, which is very informative. And so now we're ready to chat.
Yeah, in the hour before the briefing from your bond counsel, I'll walk you through the public testimony that you received. And also, one of the most significant comments that you received was from Mr. Pettit, which he provided you with a copy of his letter. And also, we just walked through some of their comments. I believe we have addressed some of most of their concerns, unless you have any questions related to his testimony.
No.
But I believe we have addressed what he highlighted in front of you, unless you want me to repeat that.
I don't know.
Okay. No.
I'm good.
And so one of the basic issues, besides questions and answers that we may have, will be for tomorrow evening's agenda setting, whether we include 6A on the agenda, which is the ballot measure for the new courthouse and regional administrative building, or not.
Yeah, and that item, as you can see, is proposed. It doesn't have any particular date as to when you may consider putting this in front of the voters. But let me go back to the ordinance, if I may. You have a copy in front of you. You heard on the purpose, section A, second page, and the language that Commissioner Menser asked about the flexibility. So is there any other questions related to that language?
No. Not for me.
Which is on top of page 3. Because again, the purpose...
When you say on top of page 3, where are the pages listed, the numbers?
Okay, so back page, second page. That's when you start the purpose in here. Second page, Commissioner.
Yep, section 3 is the next one down then from that paragraph?
Section 2, Commissioner.
Yep.
Right below section 2 is purpose.
2A.
Okay,
2A is the
2A,
purpose.
got it.
So that's when I start outlining the purpose and carry on to next page.
Top of the next page.
And that is the language, the flexibility language that you heard from the bond counsel. And I just want to make sure if there's any questions on that.
Okay, good. I guess where I was going with that is I like to have dates and page numbers on everything, is all. So when you say section, page 3, I can, page 3.
Well, we can add pages to that.
Okay, that's all.
Okay. So for the top of page 3, any questions or comments regarding that section?
Because that was one of the sections,
This-
I believe you, Commissioner Messi, had a question. It was a source of Mr. Pettit's comments
Right.
as well.
Well,
It says if it's impractical, we can't build it, if it's approved, if we can't build it, what do we do?
are we going to have a general discussion on this now?
Yes.
Maybe amongst ourselves about if we feel it's the right thing to do to move forward in total with this ordinance. That's kind of where I'm at, I guess.
Yes, sir.
Related to the ordinance, I'd like to propose an amendment to the ordinance for your consideration, if you decide to move forward. As I mentioned to you in the section, the purpose section gives us the flexibility of the language. I would like to propose to remove 1, 2, 3, the 5th whereas on the first page.
And the 5th whereas on the first page. 1, 2, 3, 4.
And it starts, the Board of County Commissioners review the 2015 and 18 feasibility studies and determine that it will be to the best interest to relocate and construct the new courthouse and county government buildings to the Plymouth Street site.
Yeah.
The reason that I like to remove that is gives you the flexibility in the event that for any reason we don't have an agreement with the City of Olympia to have this building on the Plymouth Street, will give you the flexibility to revisit that option later on in terms of the location. So you're now bound on this ordinance by that site.
Sure.
That will be my recommendation
Do you need some kind of a motion or something for this board to
This is
remove
my-
that?
this is my
Or just a
proposal.
thumbs up?
You need to enact on this, so just
Yes.
proposing it as a suggestion.
So I agree with your suggestion. So that's, I guess, I'll let it go with that.
To not limit us to the Plum Street site.
No, that's what it does.
That's what it
Really,
does,
It gives you
right.
more flexibility within the ordinance.
Question or comment regarding that?
There is some legal, I mean, at some point, we did preference the Plum Street site. Is that's still operative?
I touched base with Elizabeth because I checked with her that I was proposing to bring this to you last week. Remember, the decision on the Plum Street is not a binding decision. You just keyed on that was the most preferred site, but really it's not a legal component that you're bound to do that. So by taking this whereas, and again, it gives you more flexibility in the event that perhaps we don't reach an agreement with the City of Olympia in terms of the Plum Street site.
My question is, what is there that, assuming that we move forward with, after the voters agree, if they were to, on what basis do we then begin planning the project at the Plum Street site?
We still do.
If it's not identified here and we didn't take a legal vote, how do I know that that's where we're going to start?
Staff. You've already given guidance to
Yeah,
the
and
staff.
that's what we're working on, and all the renderings and everything else is predicated on the Plum Street side.
And we did take a vote on the Plum Street site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the majority said?
That was done.
No, for me, it's just in the event that for any reason we don't get an agreement with the City of Olympia, you're not bound. You have the flexibility to look at other options. That's all my suggestion. Look for more flexibility within this ordinance.
As long as it is, if we choose to agree with that, as long as it is portrayed to Olympia that we're not actually out of the whole
No,
gig.
and I have.
This is the reason why.
I have a meeting with the city manager. I will convey that information. There is not a second guess. There is just the flexibility to the commission and
Okay.
the ordinance, similar to the language that you have on the funding.
And as long as they know at this point in time, as we said, we have no intention on changing the site.
Yeah, and
We just
you
don't want to
have-
limit
and-
it in the
and you-
resolution or the
and you-
ordinance.
And you have not.
Right.
Okay, no question.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I would also suggest the whereas immediately above it should be all in caps. Thank you. So we're going to look at the top of page 3, that doesn't have a number, if the Board of County Commissioners shall determine it becomes impractical. We're going to address that now?
Yep.
Okay.
I believe you already did. Or did I?
Did
miss?
we? What did we decide? What did we decide?
Bond council kind of said that it needed to be there, is the way I took their recommendation.
I'm
But if you
okay
like-
with having it in there.
Okay, then. It might be, I mean, like you said earlier, it'll be used against
Oh, for sure.
whomever it needs to be against.
I don't think we can get away from the potential of that happening
No,
on any of the issues.
but it needs to be there per the bond council.
This gives you the maximum ability to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the county.
I would say,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say that this issue is probably one of the issues that relate to trust. I keep bringing trust up, and this will probably be an issue why, because we're not trusted by the public is the bottom line, in my estimation, to do the right thing, nor is a future board trusted to do the right thing, because we don't know who the public does not know who the future board is or the philosophy of the future board. So I think trust is one of the bigger issues the whole thing is hinged on. And by having this in there, you're kind of trusting the government. You know, we're here from the government. We're here to help. We're going to do the right thing. I like to think that's true, but I don't think the public agrees with that. So even though I agree with bond counsel that it has to be in there to give us some leeway, I think it does give ammunition to those that might be opposed to it, that they would probably not trust us. And I can tell you that I don't believe trust is alive and well in the public.
So the bond council did say that we could levy less and come down, stair step it down. Can we add language to that to give some people some comfort that if for whatever reason the sky's falling and we don't, this is our plan? And I'm not looking for you for the answer, because it's going to be for this board to make that decision too, if we include something like that.
So you've got in section 3, it says not to exceed 47 cents per $1,000. So you've got the not to exceed here already. That would signify your ability to impose less. Are you suggesting that perhaps you have something in this document that says if the building costs less than we think it does, then we're going to levy less?
No.
Okay.
I'm
so
suggesting
help
if
me
a
out.
catastrophic occurrence happens and we're not going to build a new administrative building or courthouse, that if we can't rescind that levy, that we will start decreasing, stair stepping it down. We have two sections, 3 and 3B, that talk about increasing and increasing, but we have nothing that says we're going to decrease it in any way. In fact, contrary, we say, hey, and if we can't build it, we're going to still take that money and use it for something else. And that causes me some consternation.
Sure. I mean, if we were to have the subduction zone earthquake scenario that we saw, you might need to take this levy increase and devote it to something more important than a new courthouse.
Yeah, we're taking from people whose homes are wiped out and leveled too.
And use it to rebuild somehow. But I think that from my perspective, we've got to do something. If you choose to not do a brand new courthouse, there's got to be something. These buildings are not sufficient. So maybe it is a matter of trust, but we would be doing something concerning how to house the county services.
And if you heard from bond counsel, the more restrictive your ordinance is, the less ability you have to exercise your legislative authority. And the intent is to give you that flexibility. And I understand Commissioner Edwards' comment. That was the premise in which Mr. Pettit's comments is, well, should we trust you? And that is a great observation, but also that's as a government, no matter what's county, city, or state, that is the baggage that we continue to carry. And I don't think that with all the respect, Commissioner, I don't think with additional language, we're going to overcome that.
Any further?
Oh, yeah, I got a lot I can talk about on this
We're
particular.
talking about this paragraph.
Yes. Well, this particular issue, I mean, it surrounds around this about, that's what I want to talk about. I really think that regardless of what we do, if we move ahead and present this to the voters and lose, then we're in a situation like we did this in 2004. We presented it to the voters and we lost, and here we are 15 years later trying to address the problem. If we do this again and we lose, because there's a lack of trust, is in my estimation, that's just my opinion, then we're stuck for the next 10 or 15 years on fixing the problem. If we put this process on pause, if you will, until we can build trust with the community and explain the need and have them accept the need, because Judge Buckley made it pretty clear that he's explained the need to the public, and he doesn't think that the public is listening to us, which I agree. I don't think they are, because I don't think they trust us. And because of that, that's why I would rather postpone a vote until a future date, yet to be determined, rather than move ahead and take a chance on losing. Because I feel if we move ahead and lose, we're stuck for quite a period of time. Where if we postpone until we can build that trust, put together a better plan, whatever that might be, yet to be determined, I think we'll have a better chance of explaining to the public what we're doing. And I could even get into how I think we can build the trust, but maybe that's a different discussion.
Real quick, I might add, using your words, 12 to 15 years and build the public trust is a pipe dream. We don't know the complexion or the attitude, or whatever you said, the board at that time, ideology. I don't think that people are ever going to trust government at any level, completely trust. And for me anyway, doing nothing is not an option.
When do you want to put it on, John?
Soon. I'm not supposed to guess a date right now, though. It'll be tomorrow night. We discuss that. But I want it to go on the commission tomorrow night. I want it on our agenda tomorrow night.
Ideally will be for you to have that conversation now, so we can have.
Have the conversation now?
Yeah, so the public knows what they intend.
Okay.
What you're doing tomorrow is exercising the vote. Today is the discussion as to, first, whether you like to keep this item on the agenda, and secondly, when would you like to, in general terms.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a chance to sway me, because I've been wrestling with the timing, and I'd love to hear your opinion. My perspective is that I'm not interested in a pause long term, because the need is really great. We will lose all the prior work that the previous board has put into these cost estimates and all this stuff. We're going to spend a lot of money just getting through the interim period on these buildings, and kind of what Commissioner Hutchings just said, I don't think anything's going to change. I mean, educating like if we put it on pause for 3 years, no one's going to go out and raise money and campaign and wave signs and hold meetings. We're not going to educate. It's just going to get delayed, and we're going to be in the same boat. So we just need to, so the survey told us we've got a big information gap. I just want to know how much time is it going to take to close that gap, and we got to close the gap. If that's, August seems really, I think there's a lot of favorable conditions for August, but I don't think we can close the information gap, is my fear. No, I think that this kind of measure needs the voters' attention, careful attention. I don't want it to get lost in the sea of November ballot. That makes February the next thing, but I've checked with all of the school districts, and we've got North Thurston, Olympia School District, all of them are going for replacement levy, and North Thurston, which is a big area, and Rochester will be asking for additional bonds. Now, I didn't know we had the choice of April as a special election.
Mary, you want to come up to the microphone? Thank you.
I don't want to go more than a year, because there's no reason we would need more than a year to close the information gap. But I would like this to be on a ballot where the voters can focus on it, because it's going to take some thoughtfulness from the voters to understand why we need it. And I would love to do it in August, but I'm feeling like it's too quick. I have a lot of input from City of Lacey, City of Olympia, City of Tumwater, municipal officials who agree with that. So I'm struggling for the right place to put it. I do not want to pause this and kick it down the road, because nothing's going to change, and we've done too much work. It's disrespectful to previous boards' decisions and processes. We definitely need this, and we have to educate the community. A year is the absolute most that we would need to do that. So I'm looking for the right place to put this. That's where I'm at. But I haven't decided, and I'd love to hear your opinion.
Where I am is I do not want all the work that has been done by the previous commission for 2 years on this project, considerable amount of work, to be all for naught. And even in light of the Elway, that shows the gap, it shows opportunity, it shows where we need to stress and put our efforts. My belief is if it comes to August, it'll be too soon, and it'll be dead for quite a while, as you said, Gary. So, and I'm not interested in November in any way, shape, or form. This is the first I heard that April might be an option. So I am currently, right now as I sit, I'm leaning towards February I've also talked with school boards and superintendents, and they are going to go out for the continuing levy, which may or may not, probably might not, but I don't know how big of a factor that will play in voters' decision.
Please don't.
I'm not going to talk about that.
Please
I
don't talk
know if
about
that's a
voting
factor or not.
strategy.
So right now, I'm leaning towards February to give us sufficient time to build the momentum and educate the public. Other than that, if April's an option, that gives us a little more time. And we're not competing.
We have 4 scheduled elections every year, February, April, August, and November. Of course, next year we'll also have our presidential primary. But I would verify with council to ensure that April is an option. But if February is an option, I can't imagine why April would not be an option. But
Which gives us,
the RCWs in front of me. to
right,
verify.
it just gives a little more capacity to public education and outreach.
Well, and the other thing is, like I say, it's not about campaign strategy so much as, voters, I think, we know from our survey research that voters have an education gap. They actually, believe that a large, overwhelming majority, 83 and 76% believe that this is a secure, safe facility for court proceedings and that it's adequate space and it's in good condition. And we know that that's not true. So we're asking the voters to consider something that's going to take a little more depth than a typical ballot initiative. So I don't want it to get lost in a sea of other requests for funding. I think it won't get proper consideration by the voters. And so that's what I'm trying to see. And that's why it was really important to me to hear what the school districts were doing. And Mayor Selby of Olympia, I thank her because she helped me. I ended up talking to Tumwater, but she was able to get the other reports from the superintendents for me. And that was important. And I just wanted to make sure I could share that with you guys.
Yeah.
So it can be on any special primary or general election. It's for a single year.
Does that open up April?
So that would open up April, yes.
Go ahead, Romero.
So as the board consider, the timing, I will recommend, if the board is moving forward on this, to make that decision sooner rather than later. It just sets the stage, at least you have a target, knowing that perhaps the deadlines to submit to the auditor for April or February until the end of this year. I think perhaps we're going to lose momentum if the board doesn't take an action, if the majority of the board wants to move forward on this. It just sets the stage, and then the education component can start working.
And from a campaign strategy, I was not advocating one way or the other than just as you said it very well, and that is, I don't want, if we were to add something to a ballot, in any way to endanger the schools with their issues, because they need the funding. And I don't want to jeopardize that.
Would we need another hearing to do April since we didn't? No, we would not?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yes, sir.
I guess getting back to the trust, I believe we can adjust the public trust in this community. And I would say that our Permit Assistance Center is an example of that. When the new board started in January of 2017, fairly soon, we were able to open up the permit, what was then known as the Permit Resistance Center. It was only open 4 hours a day, and the answer was no. No matter what your question was, the answer was no. The public put up with that philosophy for 8 years. We had a briefing from the board, or from the staff over there, that in 2018, I think it was, we had 16,000 applicants come through that permit center. If we refer back to the past 8 years prior to it being open 8 hours a day, and we've put a lot of effort into staff treating the people correctly and politely and trying to help. The prior 8 years before we got that going, the answer was no. Just say there was 10,000 people that came through every year. They left here with a very sour attitude about government. That is just one example. I've been advocating for quite some time that our directors be out in the community addressing Chamber of Commerce's, service clubs, that type of activity, delivering the message of the county need. You've heard me talk numerous times about the disparity on the taxing, on the Ruckelhaus study. I just feel that, yes, we can build trust. It's no different than the policeman in the car or walking the beat. You wave to people once in a while when you make eye contact. That simple gesture builds trust. Pretty soon, you have the public talking to you. Pretty soon, when you meet the public somewhere, they'll communicate an issue. I am a perfect example of success because I built public trust. And I believe in public trust. And I'm going to say that I have told this board that I would not blindside you, but I will tell you publicly, in light of the Elway study and that lack of trust and the direction that we need to go, I'm not going to be able to support this issue when it goes on the ballot. I will be actively opposing it because I think it's a terrible mistake the way it's put together now, and because of those issues, that is why I am a proponent of hitting the pause button, if you will. How long will that take? I don't know. It'll take a lot of time, I'm sure, to build public trust, but I feel this is all about public trust, so I'll let it go at that.
Did I miss something in the Elway survey that said the public's lack of knowledge or lack of support was because they don't trust the government? Was that in there?
No.
Okay.
No, it wasn't there.
Okay.
If the public doesn't, if Commissioner Edwards is right and the voters will send this in defeat and we'll build that trust and we'll come back to them because we won't have a choice, because we need to make a change. But I think a year, if we were to decide April, is enough time to close the education gap. What I read out of the Elway survey was an education gap. When 83% believe that the county, that the facilities are in good condition, there's an education gap. That's not political or values, that's just not a fact. And when the public learns that we have to spend $50 million over the next 10 years, they're not going to be happy about a decision to maintain ourselves in the current. That's 20% of the total project that we're just going to waste on a building that's old and used its life. When the public can find out that district court is operating on 50% of its needed space today, and we're going to grow by 40%, and we're doing nothing about trying to educate and create adequate facilities for our courts, they're not going to be happy about that either. That's just going to further erode public trust, in my view. So I understand, and I'm not discounting anything that Commissioner Edwards is saying. I think we do have a trust issue, but I agree with Commissioner Hutchings that government always struggles with a trust issue. And I think Thurston County's done a lot of things right, frankly. I've been watching this government for the last decade, and I think it does a lot of good things and a lot of things right. I don't see the trust issue as any different than any government that tries to ask for money for a parks district or a special tax for different things. And we have different points of view on that in our county. We're going to have to get over that hurdle, but I don't see that delay beyond a year is going to serve the public.
I'm with you. I don't discount what you're saying about public trust or public trust in government. It's always there. It's going to continue to be there. I don't dispel what you're saying, Gary. The however is, and you can infer the Elway survey that way, but you can also infer it any other way. So I don't see that public trust being brought out in this or spotlighted in the survey. It's just, for me, it's the public education piece. They just, bless their hearts, they just don't know. So I'm ready to move on, but you have something? Go ahead.
I guess I just, I'm a bit bit redundant, I guess, when I go back to trust, but when you say the public doesn't, you're not sure, they don't trust us, I can tell you, building that jail over there in the location it is, and then the 60 million or whatever was spent on it, and then it sat empty for almost 6 years or something like that. It's gonna take the public a long time to get over that. We just settled a $16 million litigation that had everything to do with this governing body. We've not even settled our $150 million potential debt on the Gopher. We've changed that now. We've negotiated that to a $50 million problem, but we've not had any positive feedback from the federal folks on the Endangered Species Act that they're going to respond to that in a positive way. We hope they will, but I just think it's too much debt, too much confusion, too much I don't know, and because of that, I will probably be very active in opposing this.
All right. Anything further for Romero? Go ahead.
So from the project delivery point of view, if there's a couple ifs here, if the board decides to put this on the 2020 ballot, whether it's February or April, if the voters approve this, then the collection of the new revenues will be January 1st, 2021. That doesn't mean that we cannot start the project before, because that will give the commissioners the ability to borrow some funds knowing that the revenue will come and pay off that. So
Okay.
from the project delivery point of view, you can start soon after.
And Mary, since you're here and you're on camera, what's it cost? What will it cost if we do a February, March, or February, April ballot? What's that going to cost us?
If we weren't the same government entity, it would be somewhere around $300,000, but it doesn't make sense for me to bill you because it's all the same bucket. So it would be about $45,000.
About 45,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's 15% of what the actual cost is to conduct the election.
Oh, well, thank you. Go ahead, Dave.
No, I withdraw my question, my comment.
Okay.
So
All right.
a couple of decision points for you. Would you like to take an action on this tomorrow evening?
No.
So then we need to add the dates. Would you like to take an action related to the February? I'm just verbalizing. The August, November, February 2019, or April 2020.
And we don't know what, there won't be anything else competing that we would be competing against to jeopardize anybody else in April, do we?
We seldom have April elections. If we do, they tend to be fire district elections. Occasionally, if school levy measures fail, they may go back out, but that typically doesn't happen.
Okay. And I just saw the governor signed the bill giving school district 1 point some, I forget how much, a lot of money. I don't know if that'll be impact. Okay, so doesn't matter what date, because you're opposed?
Yes.
I'd say April.
I say April.
Okay, so I'll work with the auditor to have the specific date in April. And you can give me that information today. And also related to the ordinance, the board, I understand, agree everything, and we're going to take the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth whereas from the first page. We'll make it a caps on all the whereases, and we add pages to the ordinance.
Add what to the ordinance? Oh, page numbers?
Yeah. Page numbers, sorry. Pages, sorry, page numbers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Did I capture your decision well?
I believe so.
Okay.
Anything, any final parting comments or questions?
No, I think we've got it.
Mary, thank you for being here. And now we're off. See ya.